In the strategic blueprint of World War II infantry combat, firepower was synonymous with weight and teamwork. The linchpin of the American defense was the M1919 Browning Heavy Machine Gun, a weapon so complex and cumbersome it was defined by the doctrine of the too heavy gun. This machine gun was not meant for individual heroics. It was an industrial instrument of sustained fire, requiring a crew of at least 2, often 3, men to function effectively. The sheer logistics made solo operation a tactical absurdity. The gun body itself weighed approximately 30 pounds. The essential tripod mount, designed for stability during relentless firing, added another 14 pounds, and the necessary linked ammunition, belts, and spare barrels easily pushed the entire combat system's weight past 90 pounds. This division of labor was critical. The gunner aimed and fired. The assistant gunner fed the belts, managed the prone position, and helped adjust the heavy tripod. And the ammo bearer ensured the constant, massive supply of ammunition rounds that alone determined the weapon's ultimate utility. A single Marine, armed with his rifle, was a maneuverable fighting unit, but a single Marine attempting to operate the M1919 was a soldier actively defying the laws of physics and military doctrine. He could not manage the weight, the severe recoil, the non-stop feeding of belts, or the crucial heat management required to prevent the barrel from overheating and seizing under sustained fire. The weapon was specifically designed to be static, an anchor of defense. The physical and logistical burden made the M1919 an impossible, immovable, too heavy gun for one man. A fact drilled into every Marine NCO, a fact that one Marine was about to be forced to ignore in the most spectacular and lethal demonstration of defiance the Pacific theater would ever witness. The stage was set on a jagged volcanic ridge of a final Pacific stronghold, a place where every inch of ground was defended by hidden caves and interlocking fire. It was late, rain-soaked, and utterly dark, a night tailor-made for catastrophe. The Marines, stretched thin and exhausted after weeks of continuous fighting, were clinging to a shallow, desperate line of foxholes. This was the night the line broke. Intelligence had warned of an impending massive Japanese counterattack, a desperate final effort to eliminate the American presence and reclaim the critical ground. Around 0300 hours, the warning became a screaming, palpable reality. The silence was shattered by the high-pitched, terrifying battle cries of a full-scale Banzai Charge. Thousands of Japanese infantry, fueled by desperation and a rigid code of combat, surged from the darkness, ignoring the defensive wire and running directly into the path of American defensive fire. The immediate fate of the Marine Company hinged entirely on the ability of its heavy machine guns to deliver sustained, concentrated fire to create a wall of lead that the human waves could not penetrate. The crew-served weapon of our subject Marine was positioned at a critical choke point on the ridge, an anchor of steel and fire that covered the most vulnerable flank of the line. The heavy gun roared to life, its rhythmic, powerful bursts briefly illuminating the chaos as the first waves of Japanese soldiers were cut down. But the enemy was prepared. They saturated the American lines with rifle fire, grenades, and mortar bursts, specifically targeting the sources of the heaviest fire. The survival of the entire Marine Company and the integrity of the line itself depended on the continuous, unbroken roar of the machine gun at that critical position. The violent reality of the Banzai Charge focused its wrath on the source of the heaviest resistance, and the machine gun position was instantly targeted by a concentrated barrage of Japanese rifle fire and knee mortar rounds, resulting in the terrifying, immediate silence of the anchor weapon. The machine gun's crew, the 2 men who had made the heavy weapon effective, were struck down almost simultaneously. The assistant gunner slumped over the tripod, his life ended by a piece of shrapnel, and the ammo bearer, who had been dragging a new belt forward, was caught in an explosion and vanished into the smoke. The remaining Marine, the gunner, was left profoundly alone, stunned but physically unharmed, staring at the motionless 90-pound piece of ordnance, now just dead weight in the mud, creating the crisis that instantly threatened the entire line. The danger was amplified exponentially because the surging Japanese troops were within grenade range and closing fast. Sensing the crippling breach in the American firewall, they knew that without the devastating sustained output of the M1919, the pinned-down riflemen were next. For the Marine, the doctrine of his training hammered home the brutal truth. The gun was an immovable, unfireable object because its very design demanded the coordination of a crew, relying on the combined muscle and attention of his fallen comrades. Now, he was only one man, faced with an impossible binary choice: abandon the weapon and retreat with his rifle, sealing the fate of his company, or embrace the absurdity of attempting to run the entire system, feeding the belt, correcting jams, and managing the intense recoil and overheating issues all by himself, transforming the too heavy gun into the final desperate hope for survival. He grabbed the scorching machine gun, pulled the belt from the dead hands of his assistant, and defied every law of military physics. The Marine's decision to fight on meant immediately defying gravity and doctrine as he struggled to coerce the massive weapon into action, a task designed to strain the coordination of two men, but now falling solely on the exhausted body of one. His initial attempts to fire revealed the crippling physical reality of the challenge. The recoil, meant to be absorbed by the firmly planted tripod, tore into his shoulder as he attempted to stabilize the heavy weapon with improvised bracing, reducing the legendary accuracy of the centralized fire into wild, desperate bursts that only managed to keep the nearest enemy troops down. He knew he couldn't fire static for long, not only because of the enemy's targeting, but also because the sheer physical strain would break his body. So he adopted a mad, mobile strategy, firing a short, brutal burst, then breaking down the weapon, slinging the tripod and the gun body across his back, and dragging the heavy, clanking ammunition box through the mud. Every sprint was a monumental physical collapse followed by a surge of adrenaline, and every time he reassembled the gun, he had to perform the tasks of his dead comrades, feeding the belt with his right hand while aiming and bracing the gun with his left shoulder, praying the fragile mechanism wouldn't jam under the abuse. He was forced to sacrifice the sustained fire the weapon was designed for, opting instead for mobile shock, a relentless series of punishing, accurate bursts from constantly shifting, unexpected positions. He defied the doctrine because the rigid rules of military science, the requirements for steady rate of fire, proper heat management, and the support of two men were irrelevant against the overwhelming reality of the Banzai Charge. His only objective was to maximize the kill count in the shortest possible time, knowing that the physical collapse was imminent, but praying that his single-handed, suicidal firepower would break the enemy's will before his own body succumbed to the impossible burden of the too heavy gun. The moment the Marine committed to running the too heavy gun solo, the ridge descended into the 15-minute Inferno, a compressed, terrifying period of continuous, brutal action where the weight of the 90-pound weapon was pitted directly against the wave of the Japanese Banzai Charge. With every ounce of adrenaline and fading strength, the Marine locked himself into a terrifying cycle. Fire a heavy burst that tore massive gaps in the advancing lines, instantly break the cumbersome weapon down, haul the 70 pounds of steel and ammunition to a new, shallow scrape, and resume firing before the Japanese mortar teams could register the position. The rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the heavy gun became the only sound in the universe that mattered, the sound of the line holding, even as the Marine's own physical condition disintegrated under the impossible duress. The barrel of the machine gun, designed for static, crew-supported operation, became searing hot, burning his hands through the scorched canvas of his gloves. The immense, Continuous recoil hammered his shoulder until it was numb, and the noise left him partially deafened, forcing him to rely on pure instinct and the flickering visual evidence of the carnage unfolding directly in front of his muzzle. He was firing thousands of rounds, a volume of lead that should have been managed by a team of 3, yet he alone was performing the miracle of logistics, feeding the belts, clearing the minimal jams with practiced, desperate speed, and maintaining the accuracy necessary to shred the dense enemy formations closing in on the company's flank. The effect on the enemy was overwhelming. The Japanese Doctrine relied on the heavy machine gun eventually being silenced or running out of ammunition. But this one gun, run by a single unseen Marine, simply never stopped, its source of fire continually shifting and moving, leading the charging soldiers to believe they were facing a massive, concealed battalion of firepower, not one exhausted, defiant man. The sheer psychological terror imposed by the relentless, sustained fire of the heavy weapon caused the Japanese charge to stall, then buckle, and finally begin to break under the impossible volume of metal, turning the forward area into a continuous, nightmarish field of slaughter that bought the Marine Company the precious minutes needed for their very survival. The ultimate reason the Marine was able to survive, the 15-minute Inferno, and inflict such devastating casualties, lay in the weapon's secret. Sustained fire, the very feature that had made the gun too heavy, became the crucial factor in its miraculous success. Unlike lighter air-cooled machine guns, which were prone to overheating, warping their barrels, and seizing up after just a minute or two of continuous high-volume fire, forcing the crew to halt and swap out the red-hot barrel, the heavy machine gun was engineered for endurance. Its barrel was thicker, heavier, and, in some variants, encased in a cooling jacket, specifically designed to absorb and dissipate the massive thermal energy generated by continuous firing, allowing it to maintain a high rate of fire for exactly the prolonged period the Marine needed. This critical engineering feature meant that while the Marine was physically collapsing under the burden of the gun, the weapon itself did not fail, it did not overheat, it did not jam, and it did not force him to execute the suicidal task of swapping a barrel while under fire from 60 advancing Japanese troops. This inherent technological resilience, the very weight that made the weapon too heavy for him to move easily, was what ultimately saved him, ensuring that the volume of fire remained constant and unrelenting throughout the entire 15-minute charge. This sustained, continuous stream of heavy-caliber ammunition created a literal and psychological killing field directly in front of the Marines' position, systematically shredding the advancing Japanese ranks until the Banzai Charge lost all coherence, becoming a disorganized, panicked retreat. The Marines' individual endurance would have been meaningless if the weapon had failed after 5 minutes. Instead, the heavy, durable design allowed his sheer will to be translated directly into 15 minutes of concentrated, overwhelming destructive power, ensuring that the enemy assault, despite its initial ferocity and sheer numbers, was broken completely and irrevocably by the technological secret concealed within the too heavy gun. When the relentless, terrifying roar of the too heavy gun finally faded, giving way to the ragged silence of exhaustion and defeat, the shocking scale of the Marine solo effort was not immediately apparent, but it was confirmed with the grim arrival of dawn. As the Marine Company cautiously began to crawl forward, their eyes still wide with the shock of the night's chaos, they discovered the impossible truth of what one man, armed with a crew-served weapon, had accomplished. The area directly in front of the gun's position was a horrifying, absolute killing field, a mass of broken bodies, weapons, and destroyed enemy gear. The official estimate, derived from the concentrated carnage, confirmed the staggering 60-man tally, a number that utterly defied the mathematics of conventional infantry combat especially considering the limited 15-minute time frame of the Inferno. This immense casualty count was a direct consequence of the Marines' ability to maintain sustained, dense fire against a massed, human wave attack at close range. The Japanese, committed to their Banzai Charge doctrine, had advanced shoulder to shoulder, providing the ideal, continuous target for the heavy machine gun, which, because of its thick barrel and ability to sustain fire, never wavered or forced a pause. Every round counted, every burst tore massive holes in the ranks, and the result was the complete annihilation of the lead assault unit. This was not a general firefight. It was targeted destruction, where the sheer volume of metal fired by a single weapon into a concentrated formation created an insurmountable wall of death. The sight of the massive localized slaughter shattered the morale of the surviving Japanese forces who had been waiting in the reserve, realizing that the concentrated firepower they had encountered was simply an invisible, mechanical barrier that no human will could overcome. The Marines' feat had not just repulsed the charge, it had inflicted a planned, crippling, unsustainable manpower loss that directly contributed to the total collapse of the Japanese offensive on that critical flank. The most profound and immediate consequence of the Marines' solo action was the silence that saved the company, the sudden, miraculous absence of enemy fire, and the collapse of the assault that allowed the pinned-down riflemen to raise their heads and ultimately secure their sector. For the rest of the Marine company, huddled in their foxholes, the initial heavy fire of the Banzai Charge was terrifying, but the rhythmic, unending roar of the too heavy gun had become the single, essential sound of survival. When that sound finally faded, replaced by the chaotic screams of the retreating Japanese and the moans of the wounded, the remaining Marines realized that their very existence was owed to the man who had defied gravity and doctrine. The gun's sustained fire, maintained for the crucial 15-minute window, had delivered the strategic impact necessary to prevent a total breakthrough. Had the heavy gun failed or overheated after just 5 minutes, which it certainly would have because of its continuous solo operation, the Japanese waves would have successfully overrun the position, massacring the small reserve and exposing the entire company's flank to a swift annihilation. Instead, the Marines' singular will and the weapon's endurance created a pocket of absolute defensive superiority, grinding the charge to a halt and forcing the enemy to retreat in disorder. As dawn fully broke, the Marine, his face blackened by powder and his body trembling from exhaustion and the physical trauma of the recoil, finally let go of the machine gun, collapsing into the mud beside the weapon that had become his anchor, his savior, and his burden. The gun, now silent, inert, and too heavy once more, was a silent testament to the raw, visceral force of one man who, through sheer, impossible determination, had sacrificed his body to ensure the survival of his comrades and the holding of a critical line. The astonishing actions of the lone Marine, who transformed the inert, crew-served, too heavy gun into a mobile instrument of annihilation, serves as the ultimate proof of the Human Force Multiplier, a defining testament that individual courage can absolutely defy and transcend military calculus. This legendary 15-minute Inferno, which resulted in the immediate disintegration of the Banzai Charge and the massive 60-man tally, was achieved not through luck or superior numbers, but through the brute force of a single Marine's unwavering will and his physical endurance to manage a weapon system designed for three. The very design features that made the M1919 so heavy, its stabilizing tripod and its thick, durable barrel, became the essential ingredients for his survival, allowing him to maintain the sustained, non-stop rate of fire necessary to create a wall of lead that no human wave could overcome. Where military doctrine saw an impossible burden, the Marine saw an unblinking, reliable anchor. Where the Japanese saw a static target, they were met with an unexpected, continuous source of hellfire, that utterly shattered their psychological and physical resolve. The strategic consequence of this singular act was immense. The annihilation of the lead assault unit prevented a total breakthrough on the company's flank, saving the entire line and preserving the critical ground, won at immense cost. This story ensures that the technical limitations of the weapon, the too heavy nature, will forever be eclipsed by the ferocious commitment of the man who ran it, solidifying the idea that the power of the individual Marine, when driven by necessity, can transform a static defensive weapon into the ultimate mobile force multiplier that dictates the fate of an entire battle.